Hi everyone. I hope you're finding these devotionals really helpful. For me, it's been a great chance to I need to pause, I need to reflect, I need to engage with Holy Week as it happens. It's so easy to let these things pass us by, isn't it? And then just to arrive at Easter or Christmas or something like that and not have really gotten ourselves in the headspace for it. And so what we're trying to do over this week is just provide something each day to stimulate you engaging with this week. And us engaging with this week as well. So we hope these things are being really helpful. You probably already know this, but over the next couple of days, there's plenty to engage with in kind of one church life. So as well as doing these kind of short videos each day, tonight, so Thursday evening, Maundy Thursday evening, we're going to be sharing communion together. Dave sent out a link, but we're going to be gathering on Zoom at 8:15, so do your kind of NHS clap outside your house, engage with the raucous noise of the whole population, celebrating that together. And then at 8:15 we're going to gather and we're going to share communion, because on the night before Jesus was killed, he sat down with his disciples and ate a meal. That's actually what we're going to be thinking about in this devotional in just a moment. But also just to remind you that tomorrow evening, then there's also a chance to kind of engage with the horror, the pain, the loss of Good Friday, not kind of rush through it and say, oh, it's all right because, Sunday's just around the corner, but to actually engage with Good Friday and the mournfulness of it and the pain of it together. And so there's going to be a chance to gather together tomorrow evening. I think that's at 9 p.m. Again, Dave sent out the link and I'm sure we'll do so again. So just be engaging all you can. I know that people are really busy and there's tons going on and there's kids running around, and for a lot of us this time is more stressful than ever. But it's so important that within that we create the space that we can to engage with God, to engage with each other, and to be present in this amazing season. So what I encourage you to do, if you haven't already done it, is just sit comfortably. Find a space that's comfortable, that's maybe quiet, or you can hear birds singing, or whatever you need to kind of engage. But create the space and create 10-15 minutes now where you have the kind of emotional and mental capacity to really, really engage with this story. So I'm reading from Matthew 26 and verse 17. On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Where do you want us to make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" So the disciples did just as Jesus directed them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, he took his place with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." And they became greatly distressed and began to say to him one after another, "Surely not I, Lord." He answered, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it's written of him, but woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." He replied, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to his disciples, and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never again drink of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. In a moment, we're going to reflect on that passage together. And we're going to use a little quote by Meister Eckhart. It's not a quote by Meister Eckhart, it's something that Meister Eckhart said to lead us. And he said this about the Last Supper. It just blew my mind this week when I found this little phrase. He says, in the Last Supper, God gives himself with all he is as food for his dear friends. I'll read it again. In the Last Supper, God gives himself with all he is as food for his dear friends. Now, I think that particularly blew my mind this week because I can often think of communion as just this thing that we do to remember something that Jesus did. So Jesus gave himself for us, died for us, this amazing story. And I take communion as a way of just remembering that happened and that I get to benefit from it in some way. But all that really means is that this meal is something that's kind of external to myself. Does that make sense? That I'm remembering something that happened that doesn't directly involve me, but that I then benefit from afterwards. And I think what Meister Eckhart says that blows my mind is that when I practice this communion, when the disciples ate their Last Supper with Jesus, they weren't just learning something to do to remember something. They were in that moment receiving from Jesus himself in some way. And when I take communion, then, when I engage with this practice, when we engage with this practice, aren't just doing it as a way of saying that thing happened over there, but are saying in this moment, God is giving himself to us. In this moment, God is allowing me to take on himself, into myself. I also love that he doesn't just say God gives you a bit of himself. Meister Eckhart doesn't say in the Last Supper, God gives himself with some of what he is. That would be amazing enough. For it to say God shares a bit of himself with us would be incredible. For Jesus to share some of what he is with his disciples would have been incredible. But it draws attention to the intimacy of this moment, the intimacy of this meal, when he says, in the Last Supper, God gives himself with all he is. There's this element of God holding absolutely nothing back from you as you participate in communion. Absolutely nothing back from his disciples. It reminds me of the phrase in John's Gospel, in the bit of the story that Kath referred to yesterday, of where it says Jesus he'd shown his disciples his love, and he now showed them the full extent of his love, or something like that. I quoted it wrong, but you understand what I mean. The sense of which Jesus giving him his whole self over. And I find that astounding. God's not giving me a bit of God. God's not sharing with me some of God. God's not giving me 30% of God. The gospel isn't about God giving us Jesus, but holding back the Father and the Spirit, but of God pouring his whole self out into and for and within humanity. And in a sense, that's always been what God has been doing. God is a self-giving God. Everything that we see around us, all that we interact with, is because God is giving himself into creation, into reality, and we get to share in that. Communion is a part of our acknowledgement that we share in this beauty of God giving himself away to us. And then it's not this third-party external thing that happened once, though there is something that happened that's important. What we're joining in with is this big rhythm that's been happening since the dawn of time, of God completely giving himself away. And this Easter weekend becomes the focal point of that action that God has always been doing. Kind of on top of that, I love the idea of who is present at this meal. Who is it that God gives himself away to with all that he is? Eckhart says it's his dear friends. Yeah, but just think about that. We've already been introduced to a couple of people who are at the table. There's the ones who go and lay the table for him, but then we learn, Judas is there. Jesus brings up this really awkward conversation at the meal. One of you will betray me. Judas is present at the meal, and Jesus breaks this bread and gives this cup and says, drink of this. This is me. This is my body. This is my flesh. I want you to take it on. And who does he give it to? He gives it to Judas, who's going to betray him. He gives it to Peter, who's going to disown him. He gives it to the other guys who are going to flee from him, lose their faith, doubt him, forget about him, ignore him, not be at the cross where Jesus needs them the most. It's all of us that he gives himself away to. There's no hoop to jump through first. All that is required of us at this meal is that we just receive. Is that we receive the gift of God's self, of God's life. Even if we then go on to betray that gift, even if we then go on to forget about that gift, even if we then go on to doubt that gift, to neglect that gift, it's still God's gift. In a moment, I'm going to read the passage again. And as we read it this time, I want to invite you to, in your mind, take your place with the disciples. Be a part of this beautifully intimate but also completely vulnerable moment in the life of Jesus. And as he speaks, be present there. How is that making you feel? Who are you around the table? Are you the doubter? The denier? The betrayer? The quiet one at the edges who doesn't want to put your foot in it? The loud one in the middle who always puts their foot in it? Who are you around this table? And as Jesus says, this is my body. This is my blood. You get to receive him in your you-ness, in your who you are-ness. I get to receive him in my everyday Samness. This gift of God giving himself away is for all of us. Let's read. When it was evening, he took his place with the 12. And while they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." And they became greatly distressed and began to say to him one after another, "Surely not I, Lord." He answered, "The one who dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it's written of him, but woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." He replied, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to the disciples, and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never again drink of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. I invite you, if you can, just to take the next maybe 5 minutes. Just sit in quiet and allow yourself to be struck by, or to kind of think on that phrase again that I read that Meister Eckhart said earlier. In the Last Supper, God gives himself with all he is as food for his dear friends. This weekend, we're remembering that Jesus gives himself, God gives himself with all he is, with all she is, as food to us.